just because humanity starts to walk in a certain direction doesn't mean we should keep walking in that direction, even though every indicator is telling us we cannot move into the future on that road. One element of the road that we can't have for the future is the fossil fuel-based system. The second element we cannot have for the future are highly centralized, distant economies on which our everyday lives depend. That's vulnerable partly because of the running out of the oil. It's vulnerable because of climate emergencies. Look at what one Katrina could do. Yeah? One cyclone is all it takes to break a supply chain. So climate change is telling us, both because of impact as well as reducing emissions, that we need to have more decentralized and more localized economies. And localized economies don't mean isolated economies, but they do mean scarce resources, not wasting human skills, and it also means not increasing your vulnerability. Because centralized systems are highly vulnerable. If those few banks were not securitizing the mortgages on the subprime, you wouldn't have had the kind of collapse. Maybe one local community would have gone under with a local bank. But with the centralization, you had a ripple effect across the world's economy. And we need to create buffers, both ecologically, economically, as well as politically. In addition, and I think you was just so right, Chairman Tsai, when you said, the US is today a totally de-industrialized economy. It showed the path of modern industrialism, but outside agriculture, in manufacturing, it has de-industrialized. But it has two sources of keeping its economy afloat: export of agricultural produce and royalty returns, no matter where manufacture happens. Now, on the agriculture produce side, the US has come to this position for two reasons. The first was the Vietnam War, where, Kissinger said very clearly, for us, food is the most important weapon. They realized the Vietnamese held together, the Viet Cong held together because of paddy farming. When you do rice farming, you work in each other's fields. So you have cooperation. They said, we must break this cooperation and dump wheat on them. Let's get them used to eating bread, then they won't grow rice, and then they won't cooperate amongst each other. So the urge is extremely deep in American foreign policy. And that's why I think it's just last week, there was a meeting with the finance, and the USAID chief, and they have announced that the entire aid budget of USAID for agriculture will be focused on pushing GMOs around the world. Because what does that mean? It means every seed will be owned by Monsanto. So not only is food a weapon, now seed has become a weapon. And if you control the seed, you control the entire food system. And you don't have to send armies to control people. Dependency on seed and food is the highest dependency. Of course, the second level is the free trade issue, the globalization, WTO, because agribusiness in US first destroyed small farmers in America. And now there are fewer people on the farms of the United States than there are in the jails of the United States. Once the agribusiness had gone that powerful, they had to expand. Because how much fertilizer can you sell? How much pesticide can you sell domestically? And the entire WTO agreement was a market expansion. But we can't afford this both because, as I mentioned, it's bad food. It's not worthy of eating. We actually have a beautiful word for unworthy of eating. It's called abhakshya, yeah? Not worthy of being eaten. And the second is, again, climate change is creating a huge vulnerability. Last year, there was such huge flooding in the areas around the Mississippi. I think they had $8 billion worth of losses. It takes one freak event to wipe out an entire production system. A model which says, let countries stop producing their food, let the American Midwest and Australia provide food to the world, is a model based on vulnerability, because Australia's had an extended drought. We can't imagine they're going to produce wheat for us. And America has, between floods and droughts and the mining of their groundwater, they're mining their aquifer, which is a fossil aquifer, where water is not recharged annually, but comes from millions of years ago. So the food system is clearly a place where we must rethink trade. And I think the idea that, that governments, parliaments don't have any role in regulating trade has been falsified by the experience of the bank bailout, where the very people who wanted free trade and no role of government begged government for trillions of dollars of bailout money. They have asked for government intervention, even more than the farmers have ever asked for it. So the system cannot work without governments intervening. The point is, will governments intervene to keep big banks, big agribusiness afloat with subsidies and bailouts, or will governments intervene to keep livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods, and the welfare of their people? That's the choice governments must make right now. And, I'm a physicist, and I'm trained in thinking how processes work. And I can see that this current process of concentration, where 200 seed companies are too many, they must become 5, and the 5 is too many, it must become 1. That half of humanity doing farming is too much. Reduce the farmers so that you replace them with chemicals and machines. It's a system that cannot carry on ecologically. And it's a system that cannot carry on economically too, because eventually all economic systems need transactions. And the giant company cannot transact with itself without finishing itself off. So it's thinking it through. It's a model that will fail either because peak oil kills it, climate catastrophe kills it, or its own financial dysfunctionality undermines it. And we need to now think of how human welfare and ecological protection have to be the basis of the role of government and of any political party that seeks positions. It's a whole new challenge, but I think it's a very exciting challenge. It's a very exciting moment, because corruption is what's keeping. It's what's preventing the change from happening. If we could look around us and see what are the signals, then the change must be made. And among the changes are, we need to shift from monoculture to diversity. We need to shift from centralization to decentralization. We need to shift from fossil fuels, as I've said, from the fossil fuel-based system to soil-based systems. And when I talk of soil-based systems, I basically mean earth-based systems, where we recognize the productivity of the earth and its potential to generate what we need as well as employment. No one is as generous as the earth. Most of Africa, 3/4 of India, they're employed by the earth. They're not employed by Coca-Cola. They're not employed by Syngenta or Cargill. The earth employs them. Governments can employ a certain amount of people for public function. But ultimately, it's earth-based economies, which I call living economies. What we have currently are killing economies. They're killing farmers, they're killing the soil, they're killing the atmosphere, they're killing our rivers. We need living economies. Economies and generate actual well-being and welfare to create happy and healthy communities.